For RCR Wireless News, my name is Sean Kinney and I'm here with Werner Sievers of Nextivity to learn a little bit more about the Cel-Fi QUATRA product. As I understand it, Werner, this is really meant to enable the enterprise in-building connectivity, but I was hoping you could explain to us how Cel-Fi QUATRA is different from an active or passive DAS that our viewers might be more familiar with.
Yeah, relevant question. We're a hybrid active DAS system. And when one hears the word hybrid in a DAS context, it normally sort of refers to a passive hybrid with an active, some kind of technology that's perhaps emerging from passive state to an active state. In our case, QUATRA is really a hybrid between the intelligent boosting platform that we have matured over the last 9-10 years and an active DAS system. And so what that really gives one is a highly intelligent, low maintenance, sort of highly resilient product that ideally addresses the Middleprise. We don't tend to go to the very large environments like some of the big DAS vendors do, the top 5 DAS vendors. But ideally we sort of pitch specifically at the sort of 15,000 to maybe 200,000. We're now seeing that increase to perhaps closer to 300,000, but that's our sweet spot.
And in some of your materials, I've seen you use the phrase Supercell. Can you help me understand what you mean by Supercell?
Yeah, so I think it's all about looking at small cells and their capacity context. So obviously when, as we all know, when there's a capacity deficiency, the need exists to bring in capacity. Small cells, in-building small cells in particular, are ideal for that. And our strong argument is that in many instances, the small cell, while it's an ideal capacity deliverer, it isn't really a coverage deliverer. And so very often the small cell isn't also sited in an optimum position, which means that its coverage footprint is even further limited or impacted. And so what we're promulgating as a company and a technology, and what's being highly rewarded, should I say, from an installer and an enterprise community point of view in terms of response to that, has been the amalgamation or the mating of a small cell with QUATRA. And what that really does is that creates a sort of a supercell context. And what that really means is that the capacity that the small cell is introducing to that in-building environment is now accessible throughout the building through the architecture of QUATRA. So really, QUATRA then sort of funnels the capacity or makes the capacity available to all the users in that sort of in-building environment.
Okay, and Werner, you said the word Middleprise. This is just a booming market that really needs a solution, and what we see in some of the major DAS deployments, it's just not really right. It's also not very affordable. So help me understand why Cel-Fi QUATRA really is poised to enable that in-building connectivity for the Middleprise.
Yeah, sure, and again, I think just a great question for us to respond to. QUATRA really, and depending on what one thinks the Middleprise really is, for us the Middleprise in a sense is not only enterprises of 15,000 to 200, maybe 300,000 square feet. It's any in-building environment that has perhaps, comprises that sort of range of footprint. And in that sort of, context, the primary benefit that I think QUATRA delivers consistently is the ability to readily install the product. Of course, we encourage site surveys. We encourage responsible environmental sort of checks, and then sort of very readily map a solution to that full spectrum of opportunity at a price point that is very, very competitive. Right? And so if you have a look at the implications of that, it's really sort of a significant cost advantage. It's definitely a labor advantage as well. And then on the back end of it all, in terms of the maintenance, it's a very dynamic, intelligent system. And so that it doesn't require installers, system integrators ever to have to go back and do any post-commissioning sort of fine-tuning and the like. So really we're not burdened. QUATRA isn't burdened by the by the cost of, and by the technology implication of having to go to 1 million square feet. So it really enables us to play incredibly efficiently from 15,000, super efficiently in steps of sort of 50,000 up to 200. And as I say now, as the installer community becomes more au fait with our product, sees the virtues of our product, they're getting so much more creative with our product. And as a result, that creativity is leading to actually larger deployments. But quite honestly, if all we did all day long was at 15 to 200,000 square foot, there's so much demand in that space right now that even our installers from a labor availability point of view can't even really keep up with the amount of demand that there is.
Yeah, and you made a point in there that I'd like to circle back to, and if you hopefully expound on it a bit. If I'm the buyer here, is this something that I do need to bring a system integrator in, or if I have an IT department that has the right skill set, is this something simplistic enough that they could stand up?
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you for the question. I think in an ideal world, everybody would like to have a technology that was just readily installable, commissionable, deployable. I mean, buildings have a personality and a nature about them which make them unpredictable. And I think everybody is targeting their product, to a time, to a circumstance where our products will be able to be installed by a greater group of intelligence. So, people who are accustomed to low voltage installation and IT installation, the Big C crowd, as perhaps they're generally referred to. That is a burgeoning market. It's a group of people that are obviously wanting to raise the value add that they can bring to the table. And over time, I think that community becomes capable of doing the RF kinds of things that ideally need to be done, the responsible things that need to be done. And in that context today, in the US and elsewhere, even though one has such an intelligent technology, even though QUATRA is as intelligent as what it is, an optimized install is always a highly prized sort of circumstance. And in that regard, a well-educated, well-experienced, RF savvy system integrator is a real asset. Whether you're installing QUATRA or whether you're installing a far larger classic DAS, active DAS system. So to answer your question directly, while I think the future will make these technologies more readily installable by a different group of technology capable people, right now, the classic RF installer, system integrator, certainly is capable of doing the better and the more optimized job. Yeah.
So as an enterprise buyer is evaluating their different options, help me understand why I would perhaps lean towards QUATRA as opposed to maybe several small cells.
Okay. So there are a number of reasons for that. Generally, and I think your question pertains to sort of the enterprise installed small cell as opposed to a carrier deploying a team of people to go and install small cells. So if it's that self-install, that carrier self-install model, carriers tend to want to not overpopulate small cells in buildings by self-installers. And the reason is that it just gets more complicated every small cell you introduce. So carriers tend to have, should we say, a maximum of number of small cells that can or should be installed by an enterprise in a building without any, should we say, higher order involvement from the carrier. And that varies from carrier to carrier. Some instances you hear the number or see the number in writing of 3, sometimes it's 4. The reality is for everyone that gets added, there is more consideration that needs to be taken in terms of the location, the siting of these small cells. And so if you consider that small cells of their own accord don't have a massive footprint, and that buildings have their own signal propagation personalities, which can be quite unpredictable, it's not always readily easy to install an optimized group of 3 or 4 small cells. And the unfortunate outcome of that, if you don't do it properly, is sort of intercell interference. So unless you have a specific carrier frequency plan which obviates that, which tends not to be the case in many installs, then having them all coagulated almost in an overlapping sense creates a lot of interference. And so that is one of the primary arguments that we have against just overtly going and deciding you need 4 small cells. Small cells also tend to sometimes want to live in pre-planned areas, some kind of closet, sometimes they're on the walls somewhere in an uncontrolled area, certainly not in an IT environment. Some enterprises like to have those kinds of assets in secure places. So that means that the small cells often can be constrained to certain locations which don't necessarily always match the nature or the personality of the building, right? And so you don't get an optimized outcome. And so again, if you put one, or perhaps if it's a very large venue, 2 small cells in, and then drive those with QUATRA systems, you end up with 1 or 2 supercells, and you're diminishing the interference implications because there's only one small cell for that supercell. There can be no interference between our remote units, as we call them, or coverage units. And if you have a building that's very large, you can separate the 2 cells to a point where there's no risk of them being able to interfere with one another. Drive each of those with their own set of QUATRAs, creating supercells around those 2 big cells. It just makes the install much more optimized from a siting point of view, because our remote units are power over Ethernet, so they don't need to be even aligned with or allocated to an area where there's power, available power. So you can optimize their location. And when you take these factors into consideration, the siting of devices, optimizing the envelope of coverage, can much more readily be achieved with a QUATRA type of architecture than standalone 3 or 4 cells trying to serve the same purpose.
Okay, so Werner, how can our viewers connect with Nextivity and learn a little bit more about QUATRA?
Through our channel group of people, we're developing a very strong channel now in North America. But of course, direct access to us as a company through our website, or directly approaching us from a sales point of view in North America, and obviously internationally, we have offices internationally. But very definitely through what is now a burgeoning channel and system integrator community, that probably is it's probably the easiest and the quickest way of getting someone to site, or perhaps even just doing a very ready assessment of what the BOM might be for a solution. So we have tools available on our website which enables an installer to very readily speak to a customer telephonically, get a very basic idea of the building structure, what the size of it is, how many walls, perhaps not even how many walls, how many rooms, what the office configuration is like, perhaps is it primarily a warehouse, is it a cube farm. Enter these parameters, which are very, very understandable, identifiable parameters, into the system, and very readily it provides a BOM, which then can be given to a customer almost immediately and give them a ballpark of sort of what kind of price they may be looking at for a solution. Those kinds of tools are becoming more and more readily available through our website, and that certainly is a great place to go to as a start.
Werner, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about the work Nextivity's doing and share your perspective on the in-building connectivity space.
Thanks, Sean.